Hello everyone, welcome back to Ansarkari. So we are continuing with the monopolistic competition where we will see the equilibrium or the theory specifically given by Chamberlin. So equilibrium with Chamberlin approach, it is known as Chamberlin approach. So here we see that Chamberlin proposed two types of demand curves which have been used to get the equilibrium condition. One is the perceived demand curve. Another one is the proportional demand curve. So we can derive the meaning from the name itself. Perceived. Perceived means that the firm perceives the level of demand in the market. So each firm will be having a different perceived demand curve, where all other factors are assumed to be constant, which means the changes in the price and the output by other players. Proportional demand curve shows the demand for the product when we see that the the price of all the firms is changing simultaneously. So that change is happening at the same time. It is in the same direction and it is in the same amount. So that is why the name proportional is there. Proportion remains the same, that is not changing for the firm. So simultaneous changes, same direction and amount. So this is what is depicted by the demand curve, which is proportional in nature. So if we say less is the price elasticity here than the perceived, because it is proportional changes, the elasticity is not going to vary much. It would be more inelastic in nature. If it is more inelastic, it would be more steeper when we draw it on graph compared to the perceived demand curve. So this needs to be kept in mind when we are drawing the graph. So a simple representation for this, like it has to be the proportional one is more steeper, so we represented with more slope, and this is the perceived demand curve. We can label it like this. So this becomes their intersection point. This is one of the equilibrium condition that both have to intersect at the equilibrium point. Now we'll move forward with firstly equilibrium under the short run conditions of the time period, again as proposed by Chamberlin. So this is little interesting and it can be confusing also. So here we will draw graphs with different colors so that we are clear with the idea. So this is, you can say, the perceived, one of the perceived demand curve. As we started, that perceived demand curve for each firm would be different. So this is one, and then correspondingly we will draw the Marshall revenue curve for this also. So MR naught. Now another perceived demand curve will reflect the downward shift. This we will explain why it will shift downward, and its Marshall revenue curve MR1, let's say. Now we will draw the proportional demand curve. So proportional demand curve would be like this, and it would be intersecting, it would be crossing the point where, say, Marshall revenue and the perceived demand curve after it has shifted downward would be intersecting at this point. So label at capital D, so as to differentiate this from the perceived demand curve. So initially when we are starting, we can say that we are at point A on the proportional demand curve, where we see perceived demand curve, which is the red one, is also intersecting the proportional demand curve. So we start from point A. So at A, we see each firm's demand curve or the demand share at this point share of output that they would be producing when we see that they are at position A. So for this, we will extend it here, and one is this. It will give us price level. Let's say this is P naught. Here it is M naught. So the share would be OM naught for each firm which is there. And this would be at price OP naught. So this is the condition currently where we're starting from. Now we see that the firm will perceive increase in the profit can be made by undercutting the price, because every firm would want to maximize its own profit. That is the sole aim. So to increase that, the only option in front of them is price undercutting. Now how that will be working under the given conditions is to be seen, and assuming others do not react. So this is assumed to be constant. So we see that prices will change now, and we can say, let's say this is point B. We extend it further. This is P1 price level. So this becomes A dash, and we have to draw marginal cost curve also. So marginal cost curve, we extend it here. So it has to cross the MR curve also at the same point. So this would be the marginal cost curve. So we have to label, this is M1, let's say. We'll extend from here also. M2, this is T point. So now we see if the price undercutting is done. Undercutting means prices has to be reduced. So prices, it falls to this P1 level. So prices fall to OP1 level, and now it would be seen on when we are looking at the perceived demand curve, that is point A dash. You will see that output now increases to OM1. Now every firm, what it will think that they can undercut the price and others are not going to react. So when every firm takes actions in this way, things remains same, nothing has changed in a way. And actually the firms, they think that they would be producing OM1 level, that is this much, but in reality they would be at this level OM2, that is point B, because every firm would be behaving in similar manner. So they reach point B and OM2 output level, price remains same after undercutting OP1 level. So because every firm is thinking so, they will increase their production, and that is why this downward shift in the perceived demand curve has been drawn in green color. So you can see this shift happens because of the same behavior which is there. And we can say that to what level this fall will happen. So this would be at until we reach a point where the firms, they think that profit now further cannot be increased by undercutting. So they will stop at that particular point. And we have to simplify this diagram and depict the changed conditions. So this is the perceived demand curve which has been representing after it has shifted downward. So this is the post impact changes that we are drawing here. That's how we draw here this. And so this is the marginal cost curve. This becomes the equilibrium condition. MR equals MC. We'll extend it on the perceived demand curve, get the equilibrium price P2. Also draw our average cost curve, and you can see this is OQ is the equilibrium output level, OP2 is the equilibrium price level, and from this point, let's say this is point H, we have a proportional demand curve would also intersect at the same point of equilibrium. So equilibrium point is although E point, but when it is extended on the perceived, so these are two conditions which are to be met under short run equilibrium, which is perceived demand curve D2 D2 dash, which has been labeled so that intersects proportional demand curve, which is the DD curve, that is at point H. We're talking about this situation. And second is the perceived demand curves correspondingly marginal revenue curve, which is marginal revenue curve MR2. It intersects, or we can say it equals the marginal cost. So that is at point E. We're talking at point E situation. So these two conditions has to be met. Now we'll shift to the long run equilibrium condition. Long run equilibrium given by Chamberlin. This was the short run equilibrium that we have covered so far. So if again here we will see firm will be making profit. So this is the cost curve point. So this is the amount of profit that would be made under short run, and it would attract more firms into the market. And we will see now, because more firms would be entering, so their proportional market share would change. So this will also bring a shift in the proportional demand curve. In the short run, we have seen proportional demand curve has not shifted. It is only the perceived demand curve which has shifted below. Here you can see the red and the green ones are the perceived demand curve which has shifted down. The proportional, this curve, it remains unchanged. But in the long run, there would be downward shift in the proportional demand curve also because of new firms entering into the industry. And obviously perceived will definitely change and shift. Perceived demand curve will also. This is also called leftward shift or the downward shift, which will reflect the decline in the demand share of the each firm. Now question rises, until when the shift will take place, or where will this shift actually stop? So that will give us the equilibrium condition, the price, and you can say the revenue and cost represented on y-axis, of quantity on x-axis. This is the perceived demand curve, which has to be more flatter than the proportional demand curve. This is the marginal revenue curve. Here we draw tangent long run average cost curve because this is long run situation. So get this point, tangency point H, let's say. This is the equilibrium price. This is point L, and here we will have long run marginal cost curve crossing at point L. And we also see that proportional demand curve would also cross point H. So DD. Now we were talking about the downward or the leftward shift. The initial position of the proportional demand curve was, let's say, this D1, D1. Now it has shifted to this level. And again, correspondingly, we can also draw the perceived demand curve. Let's say it was this. So we just have to show that they have shifted down. So this has now shifted parallelly down to this level, perceived demand curve. So now equilibrium is at point L, and correspondingly, this is equilibrium price, this is equilibrium output. And when we have to compare it with, again, the perfect competition, so let's say point S would be the equilibrium point, which is the minimum of LSE. And this would be excess capacity that would emerge here also. So we can say in the end, when we're overall, if we have to critique what are the shortcomings of even the Chamberlin's approach, so it is in the unrealistic in the sense that we assumed same cost and revenue curves in the beginning, which is unrealistic, which is again not possible in real life. And also we assumed no interdependence. That is also not possible practically. So another, we can say that it has also low predicting power, because we were talking about perceived demand curve. So the power of perceiving or prediction is also seen to be not working or not being in sync with the real life changes or how things work practically. And empirically also, empirical analysis also not point towards the real life happenings. So empirical working is not seen, or it is absent in the curve. So it is more of, we can say, theoretical, but the understanding is important here, because again direct question has been asked regarding the perceived and the proportional demand curve. So that's all, and here we complete with the monopolistic competition in the microeconomics section. So thank you so much for joining us on Ansarkari.